The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
Remember this, when you're the greatest fighter in the world today, they got a name for you. They don't call you a great fighter, they call you Chael Sonnen. Beat me, if you can.
And after tonight, none of you in this ring will ever again! You're talking to the Rolex wearing, diamond ring wearing, kid stealing, woo, wheeling dealing, limousine riding, jet flying, son of a gun, and I'm having a hard time holding these alligators down. Woo! I'm gonna drink a Coors Light. That's a Coors Light because Bud Light won't pay me nothing. And I have my cold beer. You have your cold beer? If not, you are fucking jabroni. Wash it down with 1 beer, 2 beers, 3 beers, a shot of whiskey. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
On this edition of the Filthy FRB Show, we have guest Jon Anik, who's going to give us some behind-the-scenes info on the UFC broadcast, as well as some history about how he got started in the world of mixed martial arts. Get ready, because Jon Anik's on the way.
Well, Tom, we're joined by UFC play-by-play announcer Jon Anik. What's going on, Jon?
Pleasure to be with you guys. How you doing?
Pretty good, man. Thanks for coming on. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing all right. Jon Anik's a pretty big-time guest, so I'm pumped up. I'm amped.
Yeah, he's a Boston guy, and like you.
Yeah, of course. He's in great company.
Yeah, I was up there this week for work, and I was hanging out with one of Tom's friends who also likes to indulge in many drinks. It's not alcoholism, it's binge drinking. And I've been accused of being an offender of that.
Brian, you spend a lot of time in Boston if your social media accounts are any indication.
Yeah, it's they let me go up there about once a month and try to not cause too much trouble. But, I wanted to talk to you because you have an interesting background. It seems like you started, you went to college, you were into journalism, but more like maybe print journalism with politics. And it said that you created your own major that the school didn't offer.
Yeah, well, I was deciding between Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania and Syracuse University. I was a pretty good student in high school. I did not want to go through the college application process. And I'll be honest with you, Gettysburg had the Common App. I felt pretty safely that I could get in there. And I had a buddy that was already there from high school a year ahead. And so I went to Gettysburg. They didn't really have much of a communications or journalism program. So they have this opportunity, I guess, where you can design a special major and sort of design 12 courses or 14, whatever it was, that comprised the major. So that's essentially what I did, and I spent 3 months in Washington, D.C. at American University. It was called the Washington Journalism Semester, and really immersed myself in journalism for those 3 months, and then went back to school for broadcasting after college. But yeah, I did start as a print guy, and then I realized there were a lot better writers than me. I was a clean writer, but I was never particularly creative, and I felt like, in broadcasting I might, be able to fast track it a little bit quicker, I guess.
Yeah, so Jon, basically you just felt like you were so good looking that you should TV and away from the written word. Is that?
Yeah, something like that. No, I mean, dude, you should have seen me when I was on the radio. I weighed like 180 pounds. I could eat whatever I wanted. It was great. But no, I mean, I guess I just, I felt like my writing just wasn't special. There was nothing really special about it. But I felt like when, we would have arguments about sports, as humbly as I can say this, I felt like I could articulate myself. So that radio sort of, I mean, growing up in Boston with WEEI, I mean, that was sort of a big influence on me growing up and wanting to be a sports radio host. So yeah, it went from, newspaper to radio, and the TV thing sort of just, I don't want to call it fluky, but I started in Bristol, Connecticut with ESPN Radio and really didn't have any great desire to move over to the TV side. But when an opportunity presented itself, I went and auditioned, and I guess one thing led to another. I got a few lucky breaks.
So that was in 2006. You became an anchor on SportsCenter. So is that right? Or
yeah, exactly right.
So you were anchor on SportsCenter, and then 2009. Well, you were doing a boxing show. I guess I should. You were doing a boxing show in Massachusetts starting in 2005. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah, and that's really what led to a lot of the mixed martial arts opportunities. And the short version of the story is Gary Shaw, the longtime boxing promoter, would invite our boxing show to a lot of his boxing events. And then when he was doing Elite XC, he invited us to go to their debut show in Tunica, Mississippi. He invited a bunch of boxing media, paid the way. And that was sort of the first time. I mean, I had watched, MMA here and there, but that was the first time I saw an event live. And I wasn't blown away with the dragons breathing fire necessarily, but I was blown away with the action in the cage. And I knew pretty shortly thereafter that this is what I wanted to do.
Now, isn't that something, Tom? So Gary Shaw actually contributed something positive to MMA. Gave Jon Anik his start. He had Gina Carano and Kimbo, but that's surprising.
I do hold him personally responsible for the incident in which Gina Carano's towel fell. So, that was a very positive happening in the history of MMA. But, John, on the boxing front, are you paying attention much to this? Was it Al Heyman is doing this time buy with NBC and all these other networks? Have you been paying attention much to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. I mean, for me, I used to be so immersed in boxing all the time. I mean, I think Manny Pacquiao was fighting at 122 pounds when I started covering boxing. But now I'm really all about the big names. There's just not enough time. I try to watch whatever MMA is on television. And obviously, you guys know in this era, it's just nonstop in terms of the MMA on TV. So it's exciting to see boxing sort of, back in people's frame of mind. And obviously the NBC thing is big, but honestly for me at this point in my life with two little girls and all the UFC stuff, unless it's big names, I don't devote a night to it anymore. But it is exciting to see the sport sort of back in the limelight a little bit.
Yeah, not only that, but, it's great to see the Heyman family, because not only is Al Heyman getting a lot of publicity, but also his son, Paul Heyman, is intertwined with possible future and past UFC star Brock Lesnar. You have any thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, I mean, they are spitting images of each other, and it's easy to see the resemblance. I'm skeptical about the Lesnar thing. I would like nothing more than to see him back. I was an unabashed Brock Lesnar fan, and a lot of my sort of first UFC experiences, he was a part, whether it was the first remote show we did for MMA Live on ESPN2 at UFC 91 when he fought Couture. First UFC show I ever attended was UFC 87 in Minneapolis when he tumbled Heath Herring across the octagon. So I'd love to see him back, but man, I'm not convinced he wants to get punched in the face anymore. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, I was reading Dave Meltzer's newsletter, and supposedly, after that blow-up that Brock had with Vince McMahon in Nashville couple weeks ago, that there hasn't been any new developments in his new contract, but he is showing up for WrestleMania. So maybe it's all a work, and it was just to kind of work the smart fans. I have a friend who often says the shoot is the new work. Just trying to bring reality to this whole thing, and maybe it's just another example of that.
Yeah. Quite possibly. I know obviously Alistair Overeem has had some pointed comments, this week leading up to UFC 185 about Brock. But, the thing is, for a lot of these heavyweights, I don't have to tell you guys this, but, Frank Mir, I think 16 of his 26 fights have ended in the first round. So, as a heavyweight, you don't necessarily have to train for a 15 or 25-minute fight all the time. I don't know. The diverticulitis was a really big deal. And, granted, there is a major physical toll in the WWE, but the UFC and mixed martial arts is just a totally different animal. And so I kind of think it's sort of a little bit of posturing and maybe just sort of trying to, stay in the headlines. But I hope to be wrong, man. I would love to see him back. Obviously it's the right division in which to make a run, and he would probably get fast-tracked pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So in 2008, you started with MMA Live as part of ESPN's digital media division. So is that something like they put out a notice and say, hey, who's interested in this? Or did they come to you and say, hey, we think this is something that you'd be pretty good at and we want you to give it a try?
Yeah, they came to me. I had sort of crossed over, at least for part of my schedule, from ESPN Radio to ESPN Digital Media. I was doing a lot of highlights for ESPN.com, video highlights, and short form shows. And yeah, there was just a lot of MMA fans on that digital media team that felt like there was an appetite for a news and information show with ESPN's graphics and production values and everything else. So because I had the boxing background, again, I was not much of an MMA guy. I liked to watch it, but I certainly, didn't have any historical framework. I watched UFC 1 and 2, and then I think I didn't watch again until UFC 50 and 04. So it's not like I had this great MMA background, but it was quickly becoming a passion of mine, and I wanted to be in the MMA space. So I got to audition for MMA Live, and thankfully got that job, and it snowballed and allowed me to get this UFC opportunity. Did the first season for Bellator as well. But yeah, I was a lot of it's right place, right time. I always tell people you got to be ready when there's an opportunity, but you got to get a break too. And I got two big breaks. One being able to get into Bristol, Connecticut on the radio side, and then with MMA Live. And had I not gotten those breaks, I would not be doing this. So I don't, there's got to be some skill, I guess, along the way, but I got very fortunate to get those two breaks, and I tell people that all the time.
Sure. And what was the original cast for MMA Live?
So it was Kenny Florian and Franklin McNeil, and then Molly Karam, who's now with the NFL Network, did a lot of features and stuff for us as well. So that was sort of the core, and then Rashad Evans was added quickly thereafter, Frank Mir, Dan Henderson, Brian Stann. We had a revolving door, but I guess it was really Kenny and Rashad Evans that were the first two guys that we used as analysts on the desk.
Sure. And then I can't remember exactly, but that was Chael cut his teeth in TV. With you, and I still remember that classic line. I think you say, true or false, Travis Brown, UFC heavyweight champion. And Chael's looking at his nails and he says, can you imagine? Oh, we're on the air? Yeah. I thought that was a great one. Tom, do you remember that?
Incredible.
No. Ryan, I don't watch TV. I don't have time for that garbage.
I think it was like 2011 or something.
Yeah, I think maybe it was 2012. No, you're right. It would have had to have been in 2011, and he was asking about 2012, or we were asking. But Chael was great, and again, not unlike Daniel Cormier. Chael, the minute he stepped on a TV set, he owned the set and owned the medium. It sounds like I'm just a hype man sometimes when I talk up these UFC fighters turned analysts and that I'm just towing the company line. But I've worked with a lot of analysts in a lot of different sports, and there are a lot of bad analysts out there. And I think our top 6 or 8 that we have in MMA on Fox Sports 1 and on other platforms are outstanding. And Chael, the minute he stepped foot on that set, he just dominated, so I'm not surprised to see him, continue to get reps on the TV side, and maybe I'll get to work with him again someday. But he's obviously got a long future in the television business.
Yeah, John, we kind of see almost like a revolving cast. You talked about it with MMA Live, but also with your broadcast partners in the UFC. Sometimes it's Kenny, sometimes it's Brian Stann. What kind of decisions go into making that call? Is it like Kenny's job unless has prior commitments, or what's the deal there?
That's a great question. I don't ask too many questions. I know Kenny Florian obviously started as the guy who was getting the majority of the shows. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that Brian Stann was fighting. Once his career ended, he was sort of segued into the mix, and obviously they're both outstanding. So I think right now, at least it looks like on paper that they're splitting the load, at least here for 2015. It's hard to, tell exactly what goes into decisions as to who's calling which fight. But, for me, it's just about getting reps with both guys so that you maintain that chemistry. Because I've worked with Joe Rogan 3 times, but I haven't worked with him since 2013. So all of a sudden, if Goldie gets sick or there's an opportunity here or there, you work with a guy who you haven't worked with in 18 months. It's a lot more challenging than if you're working with a guy on a weekly basis. So that's really just the big challenge, not stepping on each other. I think chemistry is something that you realize pretty quickly. You either have it with a broadcast partner or you don't, but you can still step on each other. And I think the only way to not step on each other with regularity is to call fights with one another. And candidly, with two broadcast partners, sometimes I'll go 10 weeks without working a show with Kenny, and it makes it a little bit more difficult when you get back at it.
I've been seeing a lot of reviews, and MMA, the fans, they seem to be hypercritical about everything, and they'll analyze every minute detail of the presentation. And, they certainly do. The worst is doing it to Goldie, which, I'll admit, I used to kind of make fun of him a little bit. And then, I talked to him, and it kind of gets to him. So I was like, that it's not really worth it. But I see a lot of positive reviews about you and Kenny and you and Brian Stann. So how much are you checking your Twitter a lot, like for feedback, or is it just something like, hey, I did the show and it's there, and forget it. I'm not looking at what people said about it.
Well, I'll never forget the first show I did in Nashville, Melvin Gillard and Jim Miller in the main event. And I wasn't really much of a social media guy before I joined the UFC. Obviously, it's a huge company initiative. And I'll never forget getting on my Twitter after that Nashville show. And, man, it was just an avalanche of hate. And I didn't know if I was terrible at the job or if that just sort of came with the territory. I mean, Dana certainly warned me that, I would have friends become enemies and that there would be a lot of negativity in the MMA space because Mike and Joe had called every fight for 10 years, but I wasn't quite prepared for that avalanche that night in Nashville. But I do get feedback from it. Verbal crutches are things that you say repeatedly in radio or TV that you're trying not to say. So I have people who will alert me to verbal crutches, pronunciation. I mean, on and on it goes. I would say, maybe 40% of the feedback is actually pretty constructive and stuff that I can actually employ going forward. And it probably sounds crazy to hear that, but it's the truth. The MMA fans take a lot of heat for not necessarily being this intellectual bunch, and I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think there are a lot of fans out there that know their stuff, and yeah, I mean, I definitely, when I get done with a show, I'm on there. I'm not on it during a show, but after the show, I certainly like to see, at least what's being said out there. It's just, not to get long-winded on this topic, but it's just such a totally different animal than, when I got into broadcasting. I'm hosting Afternoon Drive on a radio station in Boston. It's Red Sox talk all day, and as Tom Lawlor well knows, I mean, if you didn't watch every frickin' inning of that Red Sox game, someone's calling you out on the radio. But the show ends, you go home and do your thing, you get away from it. Now, if you don't want to get away from it, there's no escaping it. Fortunately, I have a lot of distractions in my life and two little girls, but man, it can really sort of envelope you and become all-consuming with the social media. When I got into media, there was just none of that stuff,
Yeah, how about you, Tom? I mean, you want to get into broadcasting, don't you? You were going to do a show and then in Vegas or something?
Well, I've done some shows in the past in Florida that aired on, I think it's Sun Sports.
Yeah,
is what the network is. So I've done some work with them. I did an M1 challenge show actually years and years ago. So it's something I was doing actually a lot more of in the past, and I've kind of fallen away from the contacts that I had in that realm. But it's like a different world. I mean, I remember, John, and this was after you had already done a show, but it was at one of the shows that I fought on. I think you were there just doing research, maybe, which kind of struck me as, a surprise to see, a professional broadcaster out there. I believe it was the show in Fairfax a couple years ago. I don't think you commentated that show, did you?
Was that when you knocked out Jason McDonald?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the only fight of yours that I called, actually. So I did do that one.
Oh, okay, so that was the one. So that was very soon after you had been hired, or exactly. At least a few months after that. You didn't work the Sweden show, the UFC Fuel TV, Latifi versus Musasi?
No, that was I had a kid, I think 2 weeks later, so I was supposed to work it, and then I didn't end up going there. So
yeah, so maybe that was Kenny and Brian. But yeah. Now I'm way off topic of what you asked, Brian.
I think, about your broadcasting future. So maybe you can ask Jon to put in a good word for you at Fox Sports or even ESPN.
Well, see, that's the thing. Like Tom, I have no doubt that all you need is an audition on Fox Sports 1, and you'd kill it. That's for. It's just so much about this business is just getting that audition. There's so many guys who are banging down that door at the Fox lot trying to get on that set. I was able to, make a call on behalf of Chris Lytle, who went in and did a pretty good job. But it's just a matter about getting that audition. So I'll certainly put in a word for you, 'cause I know you'd crush it if you got that chance. It's just hard with all the guys who are entrenched, and need their reps. Sometimes it's just a matter of breaking in. But once you break in, I have no doubt that you'd stay.
Yeah, you said some really interesting things like that I've been sitting back thinking about, Jon. You said you don't watch a UFC from UFC 2 till 50. Is that about right? Now, you think UFC 50, you're way ahead of the game compared to most of the fans that are out there now. So,
yeah, well, I mean, it's funny too, because I always, trot out that line that I really don't have a great historical framework for MMA. UFC Fight Pass obviously has been a huge tool, and when I took the UFC job, I had 2 months before I called my first fight. So, I probably watched more UFC film in those 2 months than maybe in the year that followed. So there's been a little bit of a catch up for me. But you're right. I mean, even if you attended your first MMA show in 2007, we're almost 10 years later. So, yeah, I don't know. I just have been a little bit hard on myself about that, because not that there was anything that I could do about it, but, dude, I loved when I watched it in 1993 and 1994, and for whatever reason, maybe it was the opposite sex, but I got away from it for a few years.
Yeah, and Jon, you mentioned like that revolving door of all the analysts like Stann and Kenny, DC, Rashad, Bisping, Cruz, and a somewhat newer addition is Misha Tate, the only female that's kind of on the panel. And she's really good. I'm really impressed by her. The way she gets very technical, but explains it in a way that somebody like me can understand. The average fan.
No, I agree, and I've said as much to her face. She was confident right out of the chute, and I think that's a big part of it. And I think that's why Tom is good. People who are the same on camera as they are off it. And I think Misha very much is that. She's confident. And you're right. Technically, she's able to simplify it, but it's still very good information. And I feel like, too, when she's breaking down specific fighters within her division, she doesn't couch anything. She goes right at these women and is willing to sort of talk game plan and things that maybe other guys would hold closer to the vest. I'm always telling Dominic Cruz, he's giving away too many of his secrets when he's doing this analysis.
Yeah. So, Tom, whose analysis do you enjoy on Fox? Everybody's got their, from an analytical point of view.
Yeah, out of the analysts, strictly from, I guess, like a technical standpoint, I'd probably say Brian Stann. I mean, the guy, like, if you watch him call a fight, you're learning stuff as it's going, and you can kind of start seeing where his commentary is leading to. And I think, as somebody who's fought and knows, at least a few of the technical intricacies, it's something that's really awesome to see, because he does it in such a very good and concise way that it's not, not clouding the view of the viewer or, of the people watching. I think he's just phenomenal.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that. I think from what I've been reading online, people really like Stan's analysis. He's not funny like Rogan. Rogan's just got this great energy to him, and kind of this interesting voice. He's just got like almost a scratchy voice, and I mean, I don't think they can ever replace Rogan. But from purely analyzing the fights and what you're seeing, I don't think there's a better guy than Stann to listen to.
Well, and he's just more of your straight line broadcaster. I mean, I think he sort of molds himself in that, Troy Aikman class. And I honestly think without 15 years of repetitions, he's every bit as good at MMA as Troy Aikman is in the football space. And, I'm sure Tom can speak to this a little bit. It's just so much harder being an analyst in mixed martial arts than it is in these other sports. I've done college football for ESPN, and, the roles are pretty clearly defined. The play happens, the play-by-play guy handles that, and then you have 35 seconds, 40 seconds in between plays to go to the replay, let the analyst, have that window, and then you get back to the action. MMA happens so quickly, and to have to simplify what is inherently very complicated as it's happening live is really difficult. And I'm glad I don't have their job. I really think these guys don't get enough credit for not just the knowledge, but their ability to articulate it in such a fast moving sport as consistently well as they do.
Yeah. And one thing, John, that not a lot of people take into account, because we're in the stratosphere of MMA. We're in the realm. We understand it from a certain viewpoint, whereas a lot of the viewers don't. A lot of the viewers are just watching it as casual watchers, and you're kind of, as an analyst, you're fighting an uphill battle, trying to not only tell them what's going on, but get them to understand it. And in a lot of other sports like football, basketball, these things have kind of been entrenched into American society. So they don't have that same uphill battle. And it's really tough, both, I'm sure, on the play-by-play side and as well as the analytical side, to kind of overcome that barrier.
Yeah, you're right. And there's such a gap between the hardcore fans and the casual fans in MMA that you can't think too much about which audience you're trying to cater to. You really just try to play it sort of down the middle, because I think you can definitely say too much, and in TV, when they say layout, that means, shut the hell up. And the power of the layout, it's a very powerful thing in sports TV. And, our producer, Bruce Connell, always talks about Pat Summerall. May he rest in peace. Working with John Madden, he was overshadowed, which is the way you want it. You want the analyst to shine. And, Touchdown Titans, just his voice, the way he says it, and then he lays out, and it's just a very powerful thing. So in MMA, you want to inform, but you don't want to sort of suffocate the broadcast either. And I think that that's something that you really can only be learned by repetition, that when you have a fight that is, whether it's wrestling heavy or a lot of, we see a lot of striking fights where guys are just staring at each other, and it doesn't always warrant wall-to-wall commentary. You can fill with background information and whatever else, and maybe you tee the analyst up with a question, but it doesn't always call for, wall-to-wall mouthpieces, and that's definitely, I think, an acquired skill.
Now, John, one of the things that I always wondered about, I hear a lot about, like in WWE, Vince McMahon is in the announcers' ears and just yelling at them and riding them and just, like, according to Mick Foley, just degrading them and, just giving them lines and stuff. On a UFC broadcast, like, how much of what you say is like fed to you, or say, hey, say this, or set it up this way, or is it just purely your broadcast acumen that we're seeing?
Well, nothing's fed to us on Fight Night. Dana White certainly has a direct phone line to the truck and certainly is able to get us messages of things that he either wants to push, or maybe it's an eye poke that we don't see, that he sees, that he wants to make sure that we address on the broadcast. But in terms of actually things that they want us to say, we might have a strategy for how we want to promote UFC 184 within a show on Fox Sports 1, and we'll have, very direct points that we need to hit, and sort of the way they want certain fights promoted. We need to make sure that we toe that company line. But no, I don't feel censored in the seat necessarily. Dana's very much hands-on. He's as passionate, a CEO type as I've ever met. And, I think we're trying to shed a positive light on all these guys, and that's really a big part of the focus. But no, I don't think there's anything, Vince McMahon-like going on. He certainly has a direct line to us during the show, but thankfully, he's not breathing down our necks in that way.
Are you saying, John, you mean to tell me that there's not been one instance that Mark Delagrati is on that earpiece telling you to talk about his jeans? Or what?
That's the gig right there. Yeah, no, Delagrati's in our ear here and there. Less so now than he was when I first started, and the tough thing too is when anybody's in your ear, depending on the fight or the night or who's in the truck. You know, you might have a couple of different producers that actually will give you stuff that is fight related. But it's hard. By the time they articulate it to you, the moment more often than not has passed. And it again speaks to just how fast our sport happens. But sometimes, you know, we can't even articulate what they're trying to get to us. That's, you know, a whole nother ballgame with people in your ear as you're trying to talk. But yeah, the Delagrati jeans comments, I'll have to work one in for you in Fairfax.
Yeah, I always see his jeans. You know, the thing that I worry about or wonder about, John, because it happens to me, you know, doing this very amateur podcast, I always like forget, you know, kind of freeze, and I'm like, well, shit, what should I say? What should I ask? When you're interviewing the guys, you know, after the fight, have you ever frozen and like said, shit, I don't know what the hell to say?
You know, not when about to ask a question, but my biggest fear is that, you know, a fighter's going to win a fight. I'm going to wrap up the post-fight interview, and I'm going to say, all right, ladies and gentlemen, your winner. And I won't have the name Katsunori Kikuno, you know, on the tip of my tongue, you know. So that's my big fear, is that I'm going to forget the fighter's name. But, yeah, I mean, I guess it just comes with repetitions. I mean, I sound like a broken record when I say that. But, you know, my first show on MMA Live was terrible. My first sports update on ESPN Radio was embarrassing, like really, really bad. And, you know, candidly, I had like a little, I don't know if it was a twitch or a tick, but when I moved over to TV, I had a real hard time, you know, controlling my body, because, you know, when I started as a radio update guy, you know, I have a certain cadence, and whenever I was doing a radio update, obviously I wasn't on camera, so I was moving my body the whole time, and it's been a huge challenge for me to quiet my body down. I still have a little bit of a head nod and a little twitch that I'm, you know, trying to nip in the bud. But, yeah, dude, I mean, I guess you just don't let those negative thoughts really creep in, because, you know, we flub all the time, and you just keep moving on. And, you know, we beat ourselves up more than I think the masses do. You know, like when we do our show open and I don't get every word out cleanly, you know, as soon as I, you know, sit down and put my headset on, you know, I'm pissed. You know, I'm not happy. But it just, you know, when you're on TV for 6.5 hours, there are just going to be mistakes. And, you know, I mean, dude, there's going to be something major. It hasn't happened yet, but it's coming, you know, and I just hope that I can, you know, move on from it.
Sure. And there's a very wise man that said, nothing can go wrong on live television.
Yeah, I love it.
You know who said that?
No.
That's Vince McMahon.
There you go.
He said, because even if you screw up, you can just say, hey, that's the beauty of live television.
Yeah, no, that's the truth. And I even, you know, a couple weeks ago, Stann and I were doing a show, and I guess they didn't close the feed. So thankfully, when we were both standing there sort of staring off into space, marveling at what Benson Henderson had just done, we didn't start dropping F-bombs and things like that. But, yeah, I mean, you know, you just try to move on as quickly as it happened. But, dude, I mean, so many mistakes happen over the course of every 6.5 hour show. And, you know, I think sometimes the fans actually realize more than we think, but a lot of them we just try to move past and, you know, try to clean it up for the next time. But it's just sort of one of the inconvenient truths, nature of the beast.
Sure. So, Tom, do you have anything else for John on, like, the production side of the broadcast?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you if they popped you up on there and gave you, you know, like the 3 strengths, John, what do you think they would be? You know how they give the fighters the 3 things?
Yeah, you know, you mean from a broadcast standpoint, I assume?
No, I mean, it could be anything. It could be like, you know, 12 Mike's pastries in 30 minutes.
Or
you know?
It looks like Dave Schaller, which I'm sure you're fucking sick of hearing.
Oh, it's out of control. I got a text from a girl who used to work with the UFC, who I considered a friend, yesterday, and she sends me a text. She's like, "Turn around, dude," you know? And it's like, I was like, well, I'm not in Vegas or Dallas. I'm at my house. If you're in my backyard, this is pretty scary right now. But no, you know, I would say that you know, I'm very much a family man, and having kids has really changed me profoundly. And I don't know if I can travel the world like this and be away 95 or 100 nights a year for the rest of my professional life. And as the girls get older, it's harder to leave them. So I think that's what I'm sort of struggling with right now. I wish I was wired like a lot of my friends on the crew are, that they can't wait to get away from their families and go to Australia and then go to the Philippines and come home 2 weeks later. You know, I wish I was wired that way. way that I really sort of relish the time away. But at least to this point of the job, I haven't been able to do that. So, I feel like I'm a family man. My identical twin brother is at my house right now. I'm so happy to be in Florida near him. He's a huge part of my life. And, I guess I would say from a broadcast standpoint, I'm prepared. And, sometimes when people give you credit for being prepared, it gets a little bit frustrating. You say, well, yeah, Anik's going to be prepared, but it's like, am I any good? Because like the preparation, to me, all the anxiety for the show is really in the preparation. Once I sit down on fight night, that's when you just let it go, let it rip, and have fun. So for me, all the anxiety is in the preparation. But sometimes you get sick of hearing, he's super prepared. It's like, well, that's what I'm like. I have to be prepared. I have no choice but to do the prep work. But am I any good? So I feel like people always say I'm prepared, and I hope that one day they actually say, "Yeah, he's pretty good too."
Yeah, that kind of reminds me, like you're a Red Sox fan, I assume, so you'll get this. So they'll always say like Dustin Pedroia's a scrappy player.
Right.
Or he's a gamer. But, what does that mean? No, he's a really good baseball player. I think he won an MVP or was damn close to it. He's a really good baseball player, and he's scrappy, and he's a gamer.
He did win that MVP, Brian.
Was that a regular season or World Series?
Yeah,
regular season, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's what. All right. So I had that right.
But it's a perfect tie-in. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's like, you don't think he's sick at this point of being called scrappy? It's like, dude, I was the frickin' AL MVP,
So for two strengths, we've got prepared and the Dustin Pedroia of MMA. So 2 out of 3 is not bad, I guess.
Yeah, I'll take it. Hey, it's amazing with all these fights now, just trying to, keep all the fighters straight. And, sometimes I'll sit down and, Tiago Perpetuo's fighting and I'll start to prep him. And it's like, dude, I've called his last 3 fights. Like, I couldn't even pick the guy out of the lineup. It's amazing how with the volume of, 600 fighters and learning all of these guys and keeping track of it all. Yeah, I mean, without but thankfully, I mean, I'm sort of digressing a little bit here, but part of my frustration at ESPN was that they wouldn't make me a full-time UFC guy. I mean, I was still doing golf shows and poker shows and highlights for .com, and I was training on ESPN News, and I just wanted to cover UFC for them full-time. So at least now I can totally immerse myself in this stuff, all year long, and it obviously makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Here we are. I think you went to UFC in 2011, and in 2015, ESPN at the worldwide leader in sports, MMA is still just a thing they'll talk about here and there. Chael's contract is only for the pay-per-views.
Right.
So he works 13 weekends a year, and other than that, unless something crazy happens, they're really not going to delve too much into MMA. But one thing that I've noticed with you, Jon, is you're doing a lot of promotional work. You're doing interviews like this, print interviews to promote the fight cards that you're going to call with Kenny. I know he does the same thing. I know Brian Stann does the same thing. Is that like a directive from the UFC? Because I don't remember Goldie doing a lot of interviews or Joe doing interviews to promote a fight card like you and Kenny and Brian do.
Yeah, it's definitely a Fox initiative. There's a PR guy at Fox, John Stauffer, that really pushes that stuff with us, especially when we're going to be calling fights. And most of the time, I really enjoy doing it. Obviously, I enjoy coming on with you guys. I know you guys. Obviously, in the MMA space, there are some clowns out there, and I've done some interviews that would just blow your mind. I mean, my 3-year-old daughter, I think, would do a more comprehensive 5-minute sit down with me. But, I prep UFC 185 this weekend for interviews, because I do a lot of betting stuff, and I'm very passionate about sports wagering. I bet on sports almost every day since 1996, so I enjoy looking at it through that lens. And if I'm prepping UFC 185, anytime somebody reaches out, I might as well talk to him, but I wouldn't say the UFC pushes it as much as Fox does, but I always enjoy talking about the fights, and it is one way to stay sharp when you're not working, because I'm telling you, when you take 2 or 3 months off from calling a fight or working the desk, it's hard to just step right back on and still do the job that you're accustomed to doing.
Absolutely. You have anything to add on that, Tom?
I'm like baffled by what I just heard. John? You bet every day since 1996.
Well, so I started doing like offshore stuff when I was in college, which obviously probably wasn't legal. And then, I lived in Vegas the last 3 years. I just moved to Florida. So when I was in Vegas, I had the app on my phone. It was the greatest thing in the world. But yes, I am an avid sports bettor. Gambling's genetic, by the way. And my grandfather had me in a casino when I was 11 years old. And I don't know, I just really was drawn to sports wagering. And even from a broadcast standpoint, you've seen Fox obviously embrace it. But to me, it's just always been another means by which to look at a sporting event. And to me, the fact that Matt Brown has swelled to a near plus 400 underdog against Johnny Hendricks is just insane. And I just, I give these Vegas odds makers a lot of respect and credit and setting numbers on all these different sports. And I don't know, it's just always been very interesting for me. It's not like I'm doing big numbers either, Tom. My average bet is, $55 on a game or $110 on a game. So it's the sharps would hate to hear me say it, but I do it recreationally. I do it more to have fun than I do to make money.
So are you the guy giving Stephen Quinn all the picks?
No, that is not me. I have had many conversations with him about betting, but no, he's got better sources than me in Vegas for free picks, that's for sure.
Oh, there's your plug, Stephen.
Did you by chance, John, bet on the Patriots to win the Super Bowl in a parlay with Puxatawny Phil to not see his shadow?
Dude, I couldn't believe that was actually a prop. I thought you were messing with me. That was unbelievable. But you know what I do is I have probably lost $10,000 betting against the Boston teams in championship situations because I want them to win so badly that what I do is try to pay for wins. So that this recent Patriots Super Bowl cost me about $1,200, and it was worth every penny.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I love anything that we can do. I mean, candidly, at halftime, the fact that it was 14 apiece and the Patriots had dominated play, my twin brother and I were so sick to our stomachs that we put another 500 on Seattle at the half. And again, happy to pay the bookie.
Yeah. And just to wind this down, John, I know you have, interests outside of betting and just your kids and wife and your job. You have a place in your heart for autism, and you've done some work even when you were a younger guy with autistic kids. And so talk a little bit about your what brought you to that and your goals. Do you have any want to establish a foundation for it or anything like that?
Yeah, I appreciate even the chance to talk about it. When I was in high school, the girl that I was dating at the time, she actually ended up on The Real World Chicago, by the way. But anyway, her mother was an occupational therapist, and I was looking for a job to do in the summer. I was sick of picking golf balls and working for an electrician. And so they had an opportunity for a teacher's assistant in an autistic preschool, and I ended up doing it for 5 summers straight. And then after college, I was working as a sports writer at night, and I was working as a vocational coordinator doing job placement for autistic teenagers, and it was very rewarding work. I mean, I was probably like 3 for 60 percentage wise in getting autistic teenagers jobs. I mean, it was really difficult to get a kid a job and to have him keep it, but it was as rewarding as any job that I've ever done. It just didn't pay all that well, and I still had the sports passion thing that I just wanted to at least try to exhaust before I moved to that full time. But I would love to get back to it in a part-time capacity. Really, the preschoolers was what I really enjoyed, but I worked straight up, from 3-year-olds all the way to 18-year-olds. And, as far as foundations go, I lost my stepfather to a very rare disease called amyloidosis. Proteins get into your organs. I mean, he died at 58, and he aged, 45 years in about 6 months. And it's just really, there's not a lot of information about it. Not a lot of people are sick with it. So that's always the first thing I think about when I think about foundation, because to see his plight was really just scary and sort of made me realize my own mortality. But I got a lot of passion for the autism as well, and at the very least would like to get back to working with autistic kids, when my career is done, whenever that may be.
So, John, I know you're a Boston guy, and I know the Boston scientific research area pretty well. Is there a particular facility in Boston that's working on the one that you mentioned that makes you age very quickly, or?
My stepfather went to Mass General ultimately. He was misdiagnosed with he was diagnosed with carpal tunnel syndrome, and, he had polio as a kid, and they were trying to figure out if maybe there was any tie in there. But no, it's just very rare, and more often than not, it's just that it's misdiagnosed, so that when you do get it, oftentimes it's too late, But it was just, my mother called me when he was 6 months out, and with the diagnosis, and said, that he'll be gone within 12 months, and sure enough, he was, but it's just very rare. There's one NHL player who used to play for the Vancouver Canucks. His name's escaping me right now, unfortunately, but he was just diagnosed, and he's helped bring some attention to it. But that's definitely something that I would like to focus on at some point, in the not too distant future.
Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't even know that was a disease, to be honest. I thought that was, the premise of a movie. You should look it up when we're done. It's pretty fascinating. Certainly the wrong verb, but it was really it was just unfortunate because they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And I just remember hearing him when I was in high school. He was just like wailing, and it was like, dude, this guy's so much tougher than me. He's worked as an electrician for 30 years, and he's like wailing, like in so much pain. And it's just you feel like if they had diagnosed it a couple years earlier, maybe he'd still be here, But absolutely. So, Tom, do you have anything? I'll give you the last word here before we wrap up with John.
No, I'd just like to, thanks, Brian, for killing the mood.
Well, not everything's sunshine and rainbows there.
Yeah, I know. Well, actually, I'd like to. I cannot remember, so I got to ask John. What is who is fighting Carla Esparza tonight?
Joanna Jędrzejczyk is her name.
He was trying to make you screw up her name.
Well, it's funny. Of all the 600 fighters that we pronounced, that was the hardest one for me. I had to say it like 100 times one night, listening to her say it on our audio file to finally commit it to memory. That's a brutal one.
Yeah, Polish isn't exactly the most user-friendly language around.
Yeah, that is true. I married a Polish Catholic. We got to sing happy birthday in Polish to my daughters. So,
yeah. Coincidentally, my girlfriend is French/Polish. So, that's how I got the lowdown on how to say it as well. So I'm right there in the same boat with you.
All right, guys. Hey, John, thanks for the time, man. I know it's your off weekend, but I really appreciate giving us this time, and very interesting. Give us a little behind the scenes view on the production of the broadcast and what goes into what you see on these UFC broadcasts. They're not just thrown together at the last minute. There's so much work that's done before the actual work is done, and again, thanks, Tom, for I don't know why I'm thanking you. I don't know what you added today.
Well, I did find you a drinking buddy that drank you under the table this week. So,
well, actually, I have proof at the Lincoln Tavern in Southie. I have proof that I had 14 Coors Lights and our buddy had 12 Coronas.
All right. Okay.
So I have documented proof.
Love it.
All right, fine.
All right, guys. Hey, thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Congrats on the show.
All right, be good.
Thank you very much. So, that was a very positive happening in the history of MMA. But, John, on the boxing front, are you paying attention much to this? Was it Al Heyman is doing this time buy with NBC and all these other networks? Have you been paying attention much to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. I mean, for me, I used to be so immersed in boxing all the time. I mean, I think Manny Pacquiao was fighting at 122 pounds when I started covering boxing. But now I'm really all about the big names. There's just not enough time. I try to watch whatever MMA is on television. And obviously, you guys know in this era, it's just nonstop in terms of the MMA on TV. So it's exciting to see boxing sort of, back in people's frame of mind. And obviously the NBC thing is big, but honestly for me at this point in my life with 2 little girls and all the UFC stuff, unless it's big names, I don't devote a night to it anymore. But it is exciting to see the sport sort of back in limelight a little bit.
Yeah, not only that, but, it's great to see the Heyman family, because not only is Al Heyman getting a lot of publicity, but also his son, Paul Heyman, is intertwined with possible future and past UFC star Brock Lesnar. Do you have any thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, I mean, they are spitting images of each other, and, it's easy to see the resemblance. I'm skeptical about the Lesnar thing. I would like nothing more than to see him back. I was an unabashed Brock Lesnar fan, and, a lot of my sort of first UFC experiences, he was a part, whether it was the first remote show we did for. So yeah, it went from, newspaper to radio, and the TV thing sort of just, I don't want to call it fluky, but I started in Bristol, Connecticut with ESPN Radio and really didn't have any great desire to move over to the TV side. But when an opportunity presented itself, I went and auditioned, and, I guess one thing led to another. I got a few lucky breaks.
So that was in 2006. You became an anchor on SportsCenter. So is that right? Or
yeah, exactly right.
So you were an anchor on SportsCenter, and then 2009. Well, you were doing a boxing show. I guess I should. You were doing a boxing show in Massachusetts starting in 2005. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah. And that's really what led to a lot of the mixed martial arts opportunities. And, the short version of the story is Gary Shaw, the longtime boxing promoter, would invite our boxing show to a lot of his boxing events. And then when he was doing Elite XC, he invited us to go to their debut show in Tunica, Mississippi. He invited a bunch of boxing media, paid the way. And that was sort of the first time. I mean, I had watched, MMA here and there, but that was the first time I saw an event live. And I wasn't blown away with the dragons breathing fire necessarily, but I was blown away with the action in the cage. And I knew pretty shortly thereafter that this is what I wanted to do.
Now, isn't that something, Tom? So Gary Shaw actually contributed something positive to MMA, gave Jon Anik his start. He had Gina Carano and Kimbo, but that's surprising.
I do hold him personally responsible for the incident in which Gina Carano's towel fell. Jon Anik, who's going to give us some behind-the-scenes info on the UFC broadcast, as well as some history about how he got started in the world of mixed martial arts. Get ready, because Jon Anik's on the way.
Well, Tom, we're joined by UFC play-by-play announcer Jon Anik. What's going on, John?
Pleasure to be with you guys. How you doing?
Pretty good, man. Thanks for coming on. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing all right. Jon Anik's a pretty big-time guest, so I'm pumped up. I'm amped.
Yeah, he's a Boston guy, and like you.
Yeah, of course. He's in great company.
Yeah, I was up there this week for work, and I was hanging out with one of Tom's friends who also likes to indulge in many drinks. It's not alcoholism, it's binge drinking. And I've been accused of being an offender of that.
Brian, you spend a lot of time in Boston if your social media accounts are any indication.
Yeah. It's they let me go up there about once a month and try to not cause too much trouble. But I wanted to talk to you because you have an interesting background. It seems like you started. You went to college. You were into journalism, but more like maybe print journalism with politics. And it said that you created your own major that the school didn't offer.
Yeah, well, I was deciding between Gettysburg College and Penn.
The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
Remember this, when you're the greatest fighter in the world today, they got a name for you. They don't call you a great fighter, they call you Chael Sonnen and beat me, if you can.
And after tonight, none of you in this ring will ever again. You're talking to the Rolex wearing, diamond ring wearing, kid stealing, wheeling dealing, limousine riding, jet flying, son of a gun, and I'm having a hard time holding these alligators down. Woo!
I'm gonna drink a Coors Light. That's a Coors Light because Bud Light won't pay me nothing. And I have my cold beer. You have your cold beer? If not, you are fucking jabroni.
Wash it down with 1 beer, 2 beers, 3 beers, a shot of whiskey.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
On this edition of the Filthy FRB Show, we have guest Jon.
Pennsylvania and Syracuse University. I was a pretty good student in high school. I did not want to go through the college application process. And I'll be honest with you, Gettysburg had the Common App. I felt pretty safely that I could get in there. And I had a buddy that was already there from high school a year ahead. And so I went to Gettysburg. They didn't really have much of a communications or journalism program. So they have this opportunity, I guess, where you can design a special major and sort of design 12 courses or 14, whatever it was, that comprised the major. So that's essentially what I did, and I spent 3 months in Washington, D.C. at American University. It was called the Washington Journalism Semester, and really immersed myself in journalism for those 3 months, and then went back to school for broadcasting after college. But yeah, I did start as a print guy, and then I realized there were a lot better writers than me. You know, I was a clean writer, but I was never particularly creative, and I felt like, you know, in broadcasting I might, you know, be able to fast track it a little bit quicker, I guess.
Yeah, so Jon, basically you just felt like you were so good looking that you should TV and away from the written word. Is that?
Yeah, something like that. No, I mean, dude, you should have seen me when I was on the radio. I weighed like 180 pounds. I could eat whatever I wanted. It was great. But no, I mean, I guess I just, you know, I felt like my writing just wasn't special. There was nothing really special about it. But I felt like when, you know, we would have arguments about sports, you know, as humbly as I can say this, I felt like I could articulate myself. So that radio sort of, I mean, you know, growing up in Boston with WEEI, I mean, that was sort of a big influence on me growing up and wanting to be a sports radio host.